Alright guys, so today we're going to be talking about the 2025 NFL quarterback draft class. I do want to give my personal opinion on some of these draft prospects because this class is just terrible. Like, you probably watched videos or heard some people talk about it, or maybe you're watching yourself and you're just realizing these quarterback prospects just aren't as good as we're used to. So if your team needs a quarterback, like, that really sucks. Like, maybe there's one or two of these guys that end up panning out, but we'll see, and let's just get right into the video. So at number 10, I have Carson Beck. Not really sure how to say this, but he just sucks. I mean, he was framed as a pro-ready prospect. His film is downright awful. He can't read defenses, and he also struggles with erratic accuracy and doesn't have any tools to make up for it. This year at Georgia, he's the reason why they're losing games, and I don't see how any team can convince themselves to take him inside maybe even the top 5 rounds of the draft. I mean, against Division I schools, he's currently 14 touchdowns to 12 picks with a 63% completion percentage. I really don't get how there's any hype around this guy. I mean, like, it's clear to me I wouldn't bet on him to even be a second string in the NFL. I'd probably have him outside my top 10 quarterbacks, but when it's all said and done, I've only watched 10 of these guys to this point, and he's by far the worst one. At QB9, I got Cade Klubnik. I really liked him, and I think he's probably going to be a really good developmental day 3 project guy. I mean, he's 21 years old and has great tools. He's really good at getting outside the pocket. I just wish his ball placement and decision making was a bit better, maybe to get his receiver some more run after catch. And he's a pretty slow processor, but he's having a really good season, so I could see a team taking a shot at him in like the 5th or 6th round. Next up, we got Dillon Gabriel. I gotta say, I was really impressed with him. He might be a guy who just doesn't have as good of, like, he's just not as good in the pros. He struggles reading the middle of the field because he's just under 6 feet tall, and he's a lefty. And it's hard for a lefty to be a backup to like a right-handed quarterback because of how they design their systems to be geared towards a right-handed guy. And for a guy who's supposed to go in maybe at best late round 3, probably an early day 3 guy, it's hard to say this guy's going to be the starter. So he's kind of a guy that might fall down draft boards based on him being left-handed. His floor is pretty solid with good accuracy and an NFL arm. I'd like him to land with like the Dolphins because they need a good backup since Tua's had many concussion problems, and he's left-handed. At QB7, I got Riley Leonard. Riley Leonard is like a fun player. I mean, he reminds me a bit of Daniel Jones, but like that might just because he's a white dude from Duke who's fast. However, I think he could be a fun late-round dart for a team needing a project quarterback, not a guy that's going to go in the first 3 rounds. Speaking of darts, I got Jackson Dart up next. I really don't like him as a round 1 or 2 guy. People are mentioning him to be. Like, I like his arm, but he's not really smart with the ball. And he doesn't pop as an athlete or have enough tools for me to like him as a project quarterback. However, I really like his mechanics and footwork, and he's able to rally his team when it counts. And last week we saw why he's a day 2 to 3 guy, rather than a guy that's going in round 1, as on their last 2 drives he threw a pick on both with a chance to take the lead. He's a good leader, though, and I could see a team taking him on day 2 to be a sort of developmental guy that sits for 1 to 2 years behind a really good veteran quarterback. At 5, I got Quinn Ewers. He's a weird prospect to me. I mean, he's like most people's QB5, like I have him here. I haven't seen anyone have him at 1, despite him being talked about as a first-round quarterback last draft class, which was much better, above guys like Nix, McCarthy, and Penix that all got taken in, I believe, the top 12 of the draft. Now, Ewers plays the game a lot differently than other quarterbacks. He throws sidearm just way more than normal, and his mechanics might need to be completely rebuilt. He's kind of stupid, but in a good way. Like, this leads to often ridiculously impressive plays. However, sometimes he just goes off his back foot too much or doesn't get his feet set, leading to inaccuracies. This is a bad thing, but if you could iron some of these parts out of his game, like most other talented quarterbacks in this draft class, he could have a really nice NFL career. He also looks dramatically worse when a speed demon isn't on the field. Like for Texas, they haven't really had that problem recently. I mean, they had Adonai Mitchell last season, Xavier Worthy also last season. Now this season they have Isaiah Bond. However, in the NFL, if he doesn't get a guy like that, I wonder if his production would take a hit, and he would be forced to focus more on the middle of the field rather than airing it out. At number 4, I got something that might surprise some people. I got Cam Ward. He was a guy who I scouted last season and was so unimpressed. I mean, however, like, going back to school, transferring to Miami was clearly the right move. He's been in the Heisman race, and even though he's been bailed out by the refs in like 3 games, he still led the Hurricanes to be a lot better than we expected. He has all the tools and good mental toughness, and he's so confident in himself. After he makes a mistake, he doesn't just start checking it down, he continues to air it out, normally redeeming himself. I think he would be a good fit for the Browns because they need somebody to overcome a lot of the things that they have. So I wouldn't be surprised if he's number one on their board. But for me, I've seen so many holes in his game like footwork issues, inaccuracies, decision making problems, and he thinks his arm is a lot better than it actually is, leading him to attempt throws that he's just not capable of making. Which for me is why he lands at QB4, but he'll probably go top 5 anyway. At 3, I have a guy who I'm a lot higher than most. I got Drew Aller from Penn State. This is a guy who's 6'5", 240 with a cannon of an arm, and he's also a red zone rushing threat, even though he's not that fast. He's only 20 years old, and a trait I think that's been tough to find in this class is velocity on passes, not just pure like how far you can throw downfield. And this guy's got that. I mean, it's another guy who I would like to sit for a year, which is moves him slightly down some people's boards. I believe that there is some technical issues that need to be fixed in his footwork, but if you could fix these issues, you got a pretty good quarterback, and I just hope he lands in a good spot for him. Low-key, I might like the Giants for him if they could trade back a bit and get him in the middle of the first round to accumulate some draft picks. It'd be another year for them to develop him and add talent to their roster, this offensive line, to an already really good offensive core. I mean, if they could get a couple linemen and a receiver, they're all set. Other possibilities include the Saints and the Rams, where you could have a guy to learn from, and they wouldn't have any problems waiting for a quarterback, since they already have a good quarterback in place. At number 2, I got the most boomer bust quarterback in this draft class, Jalen Milroe. He's a special athlete and has a cannon of an arm and is easily the best scrambler in this draft class. And he's also thick, allowing him to absorb hits like it's nothing. He reminds me a bit of Anthony Richardson, but I think he's a bit shorter and has a lot more polish as a passer. I mean, 68% completion percentage, 15 touchdowns, and only 6 picks for a rushing quarterback is really good. He's also leading his team in rushing yards with over 600 yards and 17 touchdowns. I feel like he's a bit more polished than people give him credit for. It's hard to know where teams would take a guy like Milroe because he's a guy who I would like to sit for a season. However, I think he could work out great if a team like the Jets took him and hired maybe like Todd Monken of the Ravens, their offensive coordinator, as head coach, so he could run a similar plays to like Lamar Jackson and sit for a season behind Tyrod Taylor and just be in an elite situation with just great offensive talent around him. If he is just thrust into a starting role for some team, they just threw the number 2 quarterback in the draft class in the trash, and it wouldn't even be his fault. And at number 1, we're going to end things out with most people's favorite quarterback in the draft class, Shedeur Sanders. And he's definitely the most accurate quarterback and best processor, and has a 73% completion rate in 2024. I've heard rumors, however, that like some teams wouldn't take him because his dad won't let him go there, but that's just dumb. Anyway, he does have some glaring weaknesses. Like most college quarterbacks, he holds on to the ball way too long, making unnecessary sacks, which he just doesn't have the luxury in the NFL to do. While I think this guy has the best chance to be starting in 3 years, I personally would rather gamble on upside from other guys a bit down the board, and he ends up landing as my quarterback 1, but he is definitely the most NFL ready guy and has a lot more potential than some people give him credit for. And to clarify things, Garrett Nussmeier is probably like a top 5 most liked quarterback in this draft class, but I didn't watch him since most experts said he would return to school. This draft class may not be as bad as 2022, where we had Kenny Pickett as a lone first-round quarterback, but it's definitely the worst since 2014 with Johnny Manziel and Blake Bortles being the only round 1 guys. Thank you all for watching, and please subscribe.